Hello and welcome to the podcast According to Sci-Faith, where we discuss topics revolving around the compatibility of science and faith. I'm Joshua Göcking and you're listening to According to Sci-Faith. Episode 52, The Queen of Science. According to Thomas Aquinas, he said once that theology is the queen of sciences. This is a pretty controversial statement, especially today. Many people argue about this and say, theology itself is not a science. It does not follow any scientific method or methodology and so on, and therefore how can it be the queen of science and so on. And we in this episode I want to a little bit talk what is meant by this statement or how we can understand this statement, and also talk a little bit about it, how theology can in some sense consider to be a science, consider to be also an experimental science. And for this I need somebody to help me, or I need some author who helped me, and this one is C.S. Lewis, who I recently read. I read of him Mere Christianity, which is a pretty good book. I really can recommend it. So especially if you are somebody who really wants to know about the Christian faith, who's interested into understanding what Christians really believe, if you are a believer yourself or not, it doesn't matter. I really recommend to read it to you, because he really dives in deeply. He really gives explanations for all the kinds of Christian terms you maybe only have heard here and there, but never really understood, and therefore I really can recommend it to you. And it also gives you deep insights, also especially if you want to talk about these topics, about theological concepts. He really dives into things that have been long solved, long discovered, and instead of, as it is usually the case, especially in social media, where things, especially also in theology, that have been discarded long ago by almost every Christian, are being brought up again and again and again. And it's like talking about a flat earth, which is also something that in some circles of social media has become popular, like talking about things that have been discarded long ago and revolving around this again and again instead of continuing and going forward. It's really to be recommended to read such books and get an understanding of where we currently are, what basically is the state of the art, and then to continue from there instead of going in circles. And C.S. Lewis, if you don't know him, he's I think most famous for his books for his Narnia books, the King of Narnia and so on, which were also made into films. And he was also friends with J.R.R. Tolkien, who is the author of the Lord of the Rings, and they were also both Christians, both good friends, and were part of a circle called the Inklings, where they just were writing about faith, about all kinds of other things, and were writing poems, were writing books, were writing essays and so on, and also books in which they dive deeper into theological concepts. Especially C.S. Lewis wrote a lot about this, and a lot of deep-going books. He really thought a lot about it. I think he had really a lot of understanding about faith, about the Christian faith, and he answers a lot of questions that come up again and again, and especially in Mere Christianity, he really answers these basic questions. And he also finds nice ways to express this, to also show these in a nice way, to give examples and comparisons. So I really can recommend. I cannot recommend it enough to you to read this book. It's really an impressive book. And in this book he also talks about theology in this also in the sense of science. So he states that theology in a sense is an experimental science. And then he also says what he means by this. He says that you can basically, as other scientists have their instruments, like microscopes, telescopes, and so on. You can see the instrument of theology is basically also like a lens through which we see God, and this lens is ourselves. So through ourselves, we can get into contact with God and therefore see him. And in the same way, like when you have a microscope or a telescope and the lens is dirty, in the same way, then you cannot see then the stars, or what you try, the bacteria, or what you try to investigate. You cannot see them clearly. You will maybe make mistakes in your analysis because the dark spots, the dirty spots, you will consider to be something you see on the microscope, but actually it's just the dirt on your lens. And in the same way, if you have a worldview, or if your lens yourself is kind of dirty, then you will also have a vision of God which is blurred, which is not the complete picture, and so on. And as Christians, of course, we believe that this dirt, of course, is a result of sin. So if there's sin in our life, then there can be some blurred vision of who God really is and how he really is, and so on. And therefore, this is here you can see there are great similarities to science. You can also state that these blurred vision can also come from biases, from wrong worldviews about God, from wrong ideas about God, or ideas how God might be or is supposed to be. And this can also blur our vision of God. And you might now say, okay, this is subjective stuff, and therefore this is not really science, because it is subjective, but science is more objective. And this is kind of true. Science is always in some sense subjective, because people are doing science and people are subjects. Therefore, this is also that science is completely objective is also not true, but in principle it could be, right? It could be completely objective, whether I measure the gravitational constant or somebody else measures it, this result should be the same. But if we both try to hear from God, maybe both will hear something completely different. So how can you unify this? So as I said, it has to do with the lenses of the inner self, or as C.S. Lewis said, it has to do with the lenses of the inner self. And the idea is that if our lenses are equally clean, of course, then we should get the same idea, the same picture, the same image. And also, that's the part that I would add also to it. We have the Word of God, and from this we can also distinguish what in our vision, what we did see is really God and what is not, because it also has always has to be confirmed by the Word of God itself, by His revelation of Himself to us. But also, I think it's more than that. It's also, if you just look into science, you also have the same there. You also have the case that some lenses are dirty, and even if you say, okay, I can clean those lenses in a way, okay, then the lens is cleaner. But still, if you go into high precision experiments, there you have the same case that even these highly polished mirrors and telescopes and so on, they are even not able to resolve the finest light and so on. So there is even with the cleanest telescopes and so on, there is always a way to get even cleaner, to get even more, resolve even more. And in the same way it is here. So it's not just that we say, okay, we are complete dirty lenses and therefore we cannot see clearly. It's also the more the cleaner we get, the more we can see, the clearer we can see Him, and also the clearer our picture of Him gets. But there's always room for improvement, where we can get even cleaner and resolve even more, as it is in science. So you see the relationship to science is pretty close. It's pretty similar. And if you just accept that we as subjects might, in our subjective experience, which is then it's an experience, receive something that is objective, that is really there, that is has some truth to it. If you can just accept that fact, which, as we have discussed in several ways, because of materialism not being a full, complete theory that is able to explain everything. So you kind of have to expect that the subjective experience also has truth to it and can also lead to subjective truth. So if you can just accept that, then you see that this is not so far from science itself, but still it is correct that this would not be a science in the traditional way, or not the traditional way, in the way that it is defined today. So in the way that we do science today, this would not be a science because it is subjective. It is inherently subjective and not as objective or as science today tries to be. Of course, as I said, nothing is ever completely subjective, but the science today focuses on objective truths, on truths that can be objectively quantified, which is not the case here. Those would be truths that are only quantified in a subjective manner, but still the assumption is that there are objective truths that can be obtained this way. Okay, time for a short break. In this break, I just shortly want to mention other products that you can have except for this podcast. So for once, if you want to really learn more about the Sci-Faith podcast, I really recommend to you to get my book, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith, which is available in English as an ebook. You can order it at Amazon. I really encourage you to read it to get a deeper insight into the ideas behind Sci-Faith, how science and faith can be combined, how they are compatible, and in which way you can find this or combine them to each other. Also, if you like reading novels, especially if you're interested in science fiction, I recommend to you my book Alien Thoughts, which is also about technical topics. Also, these ideas of Sci-Faith are baked into this book and many other ideas. Basically, the whole story of the gospel is told in a way in a science fiction story. So if you are interested in this, I really recommend it to you. This is also available as an ebook, also in English. And I also have, if you are familiar with the German language, I also have a new crime novel. It's called the Odysseus-Liste, where it is about basically a murder that needs to be, or it looks like a suicide, and it needs to be resolved. And there are many also interesting points in it about open source technology and so on. And also it has this idea behind Sci-Faith that you also find in my book, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith. It's also in there. So I'm always, when I'm writing these books without this intention of putting these ideas into it, I'm always astonished that later I find that they still are in this, because those are basic principles, and I think it's interesting how they come up basically everywhere in every story and so on. And if you are interested in this, it's a pretty short book. You need to be able to read German, of course. It's only 75 pages or something, so it's a quick read, but it's also really exciting and a really nice story, I think. And this you can also order at Thalia. And I'm looking into, maybe I can do an English version of this. I see what I can do, and if so, then I will announce it as soon as it is possible. Maybe also the books I mentioned right now, except for the last one, they are only available as ebooks. Maybe I will convert them into a print version that you can also get a print version of this. If you would be interested in this, if you say, I really would like to read those books, but I only read print versions, then let me know. Then I know there is a demand for that, and then I will try to put more effort into this endeavor. And if you have any kind of feedback to my books, or want to write a review, or want to get in touch with me, and you can always use the contact form at my webpage, sci-faith.de/en. I really like to hear from you and get any feedback from you, and also ideas for new podcast episodes, and so feel free to contact me at any time. What's more, it's also not only that we each looks individually with their lenses, it's also what C.S. Lewis also emphasizes, is that there is a Christian brotherhood, so to speak, and this is basically the technical equipment of science, the laboratory outfit, as he calls it, so that we are learning together as a community, as a whole community of Christians. So it's not that one person himself is the great prophet and has understood everything, but that we each other get understand things about God, see in part, as Paul also states in the Bible, we each see in part, and then we can put this together to more and more get a picture out of it. And if each of the Christians keeps his lens as clean as it is possible, and we put this all together, then we will achieve an image that is as clear as can be. And then it's also, you can kind of see it like if you do experiments in, for example, particle physics, where you have a lot of data flowing around, and you have background events, you have signal events, and then in the end, with enough data, you will have enough statistics to separate the signal from the background. So the signal would be the part that is really the objective reality, and the background would be stuff that's just flowing around in there. And in the same sense, you can see it here, that if we have this Christian brotherhood of many believers who bring together their stuff, their experience of God together, then you will have maybe a lot of background, maybe a lot of individuals who have one thing that nobody else experienced, but you also will have many things that others can confirm that they have experienced in the same way. And this is basically like signal and background that you can separate then. So there you can see there's also a close similarity to science. And therefore, I think the statement that theology is the queen of science is already therefore valid if you can expand the view of science to even include such subjective experiences, which, if you want to have a complete science, if you really want to understand the world in its completeness, you have to do, because you have to include it, as I have shown before, and therefore you kind of have to include it. But if you say, okay, we restrict science to only focus on this objective world, on these things as science is defined today, even then I think the statement is valid, not in the way that it is a science that is over all the science, because in this way then it would definitionally not be a science, but still you would have the fact that all these sciences that we are practicing today, they came forth out of this worldview, out of a worldview, as I said in the podcast episode to the scientific method, and in several other episodes, it came out of this worldview of natural theology, and where basically one said that God reveals himself not only in scripture but also in nature. And from this, we have these ideas that natural laws are holding universally, and many other things that we are implicitly believe about science that we just do not question anymore, which basically are the axioms of science, maybe even axioms of science that we are not even aware of, that are so completely clear to us that we do not even question them, that we do not even begin to question them, that we are not even aware that we are convinced of these things, and these things, and they follow from this Christian worldview, and they follow basically therefore from Christian theology, and therefore you can clearly say that the sciences came forth from this theology, and therefore the statement of theology being the queen of sciences makes also sense in this sense. So even if you say I want to leave science defined as it is today, even then there's a strong argument to say that theology is the queen of the science, not because it is then a science itself in this kind of definition, but because science and the scientific worldview came forth from this theology, from this theological worldview. So that's everything for today's episode. I hope you liked it and you enjoyed each part of it. If you want to get in touch with me or discuss a topic or want to give me some feedback, then feel free to contact me using the contact form on my website, sci-faith.de/en. And there you can go to the contact tab and contact me. And if you have any other things or episodes you want to have covered there, or topics you want to have covered, feel free to contact me there. Also, if you are not yet familiar with the format in which this podcast is produced, let me just briefly explain it to you. So there is always at the beginning of a month or of a block, there is a big block of 4 episodes in one thing. It's kind of like a preview, which I call it, where you have the next 4 episodes all in one episode together, combined. And this is for people who like to hear long format podcasts, who have a long way to work or something else, where they can listen to a long episode and can then have a preview of the next 4 episodes all at once, and are completely up to date from the beginning of the block. For those who like their episodes shorter, who prefer it if they have a half an hour or even less of a podcast episode, for those there is every week afterwards will appear a podcast episode almost in that length, and this way I can publish every week a new podcast every episode, and everyone can have it his own way, either once a month a long chunk of content, or once a week a shorter format podcast episode. So I think that's the best way for everyone, and also for me when I'm producing it. Please also note that this is an independent podcast, which means that it is recorded, produced, and marketed by me. So I really need your support in this. So if you like this podcast, then give it a 5-star rating. And if you have the time, even write a review to it. This just helps other listeners to become aware of this podcast, and then people who might be interested in this content can become aware of it. Also, if you have friends who you think would like this content, then recommend it to them and share it with them. Also, you can support me in other ways, for example by reading my blog and subscribing to my newsletter, or even by reading my books, which you can find on Amazon. For example, there is my latest novel out now is Alien Thoughts, which is pretty entertaining from the feedback that I gotten, and so it's also in some way related to science and faith. The topic of it is also in there, but of course you can also read the book to this podcast, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith, which is also available in English since last year. Thank you for that. And now I wish you a wonderful day, and I'm looking forward for you to tune in again next time.